When I was young, it was rumored that the priest in our town did things that were not allowed in the church. These comments originated because he had been in the church for more than 10 years, and normally, they were replaced in 1 or 2. Besides, the parish staff never spoke of him, as if it were strictly forbidden or maybe out of fear. They added that once a month a person disappeared, either an adult or an adolescent, but always female. That's how one night, which I thought would be normal like the others, I ended up observing something you could only see in movies. That time I was sitting on the furniture in my house next to the living room window, which allowed me to see the street perfectly. I was reading a book my father gave me from a fantasy genre saga, and at that hour, silence reigned. Nothing distracted me, and I took advantage of it until my eyes closed by themselves. Then, through the window, I saw a man dressed like the priest, but his face seemed different. I couldn't confirm it was him, but he frequently looked around as if he didn't want anyone to follow or see him. I was filled with curiosity, and something inside me said I had to go out and see where he was going. So I did. I opened the door silently and hid in the shadows of the trees as we passed street after street. The surprise was when he walked towards the hill and entered it. I didn't understand why he would do that or for what purpose, but I had to speed up to not lose him among the trees. The sound of animals around there muffled my footsteps, which were relatively close. On 1 or 2 occasions, I feared he would discover me, but it didn't happen. Finally, we arrived at a part of the hill lit with torches, and several people were on a pile of straw wearing black robes. I recognized them all. They were the ones who helped the priest in Mass with the offerings, the altar boys, and everything. I didn't understand what they were doing there, but then I could see the man I was following better. If it was the priest, he seemed like a different, unrecognizable person, but that wasn't what left me stunned. What impressed me was that among all the straw on which these people stood, a girl emerged with no pupils. Her eyes were completely white, and she had her mouth open, letting out abundant saliva that soaked her clothes. They all had very large silver crucifixes and pointed them at the girl while the priest walked up and placed his hand on her forehead. From the contact between his fingers and her skin, smoke arose that burned her. Instead of screaming, she seemed to growl or roar, a sound that drove away all nearby animals. I didn't know a human could make such a sound, and from where I was, it was evident that it hurt. The priest began to recite words in a very strange language that I obviously couldn't understand. Holding the Bible in his hands while with the other, he sprinkled holy water on the girl, which seemed to evaporate upon contact. It was an extremely shocking scene. I had to support myself against a tree with my hands to avoid falling as my legs trembled uncontrollably, and fear paralyzed me to the point that I couldn't even turn around and go back the way I had come. The girl began to levitate, but the straw didn't let me confirm that. I didn't know if she was really doing it unaided, or if there was something underneath causing such an effect or phenomenon. I noticed the horrified looks of those surrounding the girl and the priest, who kept on and on speaking. The girl began to speak in a very deep voice, mocking the priest and saying she would kill everyone there. That voice gave me an incredible shiver. I cried without even realizing the tears streaming down my cheek. Finally, something dark and semi-transparent emerged from the girl's body, and she dropped her arms immediately, falling backward onto the straw, no longer giving the impression of levitating. They all rushed to her, and some dropped their crucifixes. Then I heard 2 of them say that the exorcism had been successfully performed, but that the girl did not survive. The priest confirmed this by checking her vital signs and decreed that the body couldn't be found. 2 of them grabbed shovels and took the body to a more remote part of the hill. I decided I wouldn't follow them for anything in the world. If they discovered me, who knows if I would be the next to be buried. I ran from there until I got home, and I swore I would never say anything about it. Months later, those rumors came out, and a lady said that the priest somehow hid his face at night so that no one would recognize him. Maybe that's what he did the time I followed him, but I continued with my life, trying to forget what happened. These are things that only happen in remote towns far from the city, making it impossible for anyone to believe in these things. We continued. Walking through the town at night may sound like one of the most unsafe activities, especially if you do it alone and at midnight. I didn't think so, and having contact with an evil entity made me realize more than I imagined, to the point that I didn't smile for more than 3 months as the trauma was severe. My name is Raphael, and this is my story. At home, there were always fights between my mother and father to the point of physical blows. I was an only child, and I had to see all that because my mother told me I couldn't get involved in their problems. It was between them and done. Even though I was filled with impotence at the things my father said to her, treating her like trash, I cowardly obeyed. Then I found solace in going out and walking whenever that happened. What traumatized me happened on one of those nights. It must have been midnight because there was no one on the streets. People in the town usually go to bed very early to get up at dawn to work, so they were completely empty. But that didn't matter to me or scare me. It wasn't the first time I went out. So I was relaxed, counting on returning home to find my parents no longer fighting. With luck, I would find them asleep and prayed that would be the case. Then I began to hear footsteps different from mine behind me. I turned around and saw a boy in the distance who, upon seeing me, stood still with his hands at his sides. It seemed strange to me. I thought he was lost, so I asked him. He didn't respond. Instead, he smiled, and I noticed he had very large teeth, especially the middle ones. It made me laugh a little, and I kept walking. I began to wonder how it was possible to hear his footsteps if he was so far away, more than 15 meters. I turned around again and was surprised that he wasn't as far away as a while ago. Less than 10 meters separated us, and I hadn't even heard him speed up. I remembered the story told in the town about the Specter that comes out at night and must never be smiled at. His teeth made me laugh, and I understood then that this boy must be what they talked about. I quickened my pace, and he imitated me. That was already making me very nervous, and even without looking at him, I felt the need to laugh out of nervousness, mixed with amusement, and it increased every second. Finally, the boy spoke to me, and his voice was so high-pitched that I turned and couldn't hold back. I burst into laughter, which I then silenced by covering my mouth with my hands. The boy's smile disappeared, and he looked at me with hatred. At that moment, I understood that I had done something I shouldn't have. I ran without thinking twice, and saw a shadow growing behind me, until it covered me in darkness. I turned around, and the terror I felt made me stop. I was petrified, noticing that the boy had turned into a tall, faceless being dressed in black with snow-white skin, bald, with fingerless nails and skin made of who knows what. It was something I hadn't seen even in my worst nightmares. From his bare fingers, a kind of nails began to protrude, but bent and very irregular. I knew I had to run as fast as I could, or I wouldn't make it. I ran more desperately than ever without thinking of turning back, and that thing did the same. No matter how fast I went, it wasn't enough to lose him. He was catching up, and finally, he did. One of his claws or nails grazed my foot, and the pain made me fall, scraping myself and getting more hurt. That thing had no mercy. It immediately jumped on me and raised its arm to bring it down hard, causing a wound on my chest that made me scream in pain, begging it to stop and let me go. When I saw it raising its arm again, I knew the second one would be unbearable. That's when I heard it, the noise of doors opening. It was the neighbors. As soon as the first one came out, that horrible thing vanished like smoke before they could see it, and people came to help me. All my clothes were covered in blood, and from the shock, I ended up fainting. The good thing that came from this is that, as a result of what happened, my parents stopped fighting. Their concern for me united them, but still I wasn't grateful for what happened to me that nearly took my life. Thanks for sharing my story, Matt. Good night. Like and subscribe if you are enjoying this. Let's continue. What I am about to tell you is how I lost all my friends out of simple curiosity and by chance. I kept living with the memory and guilt that I had the possibility of preventing that tragedy in my hands. But we all got carried away by the unknown, and the ending was tragic. It turns out that in the town where we lived, there were rumors that in a house deep in the hill lived Victor Morales, a lonely but very strange man who died years ago. but everyone said his body was never found, even though they made people believe it was, burying who knows what in his place. That topic haunted me and my friends, so one day we went to Victor's grave and the names and dates matched. So in theory, it was his grave. A friend's grandmother had a photo of him when he was alive, and that's when they suggested going to that house to confirm if Victor lived or it was someone else. We already knew what he looked like physically and had the courage. The thing is, we made the mistake of mixing it with idiocy and immaturity. 2 days later, 2 friends and I went into the hill towards where people said that house was. The whole way felt good. It was like an exploration. It took us 2 hours to find the house among the trees, and so much vegetation we had to go through. Seeing it from afar gave us a shiver of excitement to be the first to confirm the rumors circulating in town. We walked together and thus reached the door. We knocked. No one opened, so we took the liberty of entering on our own. The place was clean. We thoroughly checked it room by room until in the last one, we got the surprise of finding a bed where a man slept. We removed the sheet from his head, and we confirmed it was Victor Morales, just as he appeared in the photo, as if time had stopped for him. The body didn't smell bad, but he had pronounced dark circles, seemingly due to malnutrition. One of my friends touched his hand, and that's when the nightmare began. Victor opened his eyes and, with a knife hidden in his other hand, stabbed my friend in the neck. The jet of blood spurted under pressure while we all screamed in horror. Faced with the shocking scene, we had to run because the supposedly dead man got up and started chasing us. Right there in the house, he caught up with my other friend and strangled him with his own hands, while bones cracked as he hit him. Chasing us down that long hallway of the house, we realized that fighting with fists against that man would be useless. We were just teenagers barely developing. We just wanted to have fun. The guy was full of rage because we had invaded his home. But more than anything, he seemed determined to ensure that the secret of him living there was never revealed. The door was within reach, and we didn't hesitate to run towards the town. Victor didn't leave the house, so we deduced we had miraculously saved ourselves. We were very wrong. We saw him by a tree half an hour later, with the bloody knife that took my friend's life. Thank God he didn't chase us, but he looked at us with much contempt and hatred, making a gesture of annoyance and a growl, indicating he didn't want anyone else to return to his house. He simply disappeared among the vegetation and allowed us to return to town. We didn't tell anyone the truth about what happened. I was so afraid that man would appear one night in my house ready to kill me for revealing his secret. So we made up a story that our friend fell into the river and drowned, being swept away by the current. A year later, the friend who survived with me left town with his parents, and I kept that secret to myself, with no one to vent to. Not telling the truth is something I regretted for so many years, but I'm sure that man spent countless nights spying on me from the dark, waiting for me to say something to come in and kill me. Many nights I couldn't sleep from the feeling of being watched, and I believe I was always right. Let's continue. Hello, Matt. My name is Tomas. I want to tell you how a simple discomfort caused by alcohol turned into the origin or beginning of the worst experience of my life, which, if not for a relative who arrived at the precise moment, I wouldn't be here to tell this anecdote. I had been drinking for 3 days straight throughout the town, a total binge, and my family was getting angrier with every hour that passed without me returning home. I was really having fun. I couldn't deny it, and I spent those 3 nights sleeping by the river, in the forest, and even in the street. I returned on the 4th day in the morning, not in my right mind, but determined to rest and stop drinking at least for that week. My mother made me food and gave me everything for my discomfort. It was a simple hangover, not as bad as other unbearable ones I had had, but I was no longer 20 years old. My body was aging, and I could endure less and less. The next day, the symptoms increased. My mother said I might have drunk something I shouldn't have, which always happened when I got drunk with people I had never spoken to before. So she convinced me to go to the village healer to make me a remedy and take care of making me feel a little better, or at least rule out that it wasn't something external to the drinks. We arrived, and she took me to a hut she had in her backyard among the trees. They laid me down on a small bed there, and I waited while she went to get the ingredients to make me a remedy. I was very relaxed by the tranquility and the cool weather that night. I wanted to fall asleep as I still felt very dizzy, and my mother had gone to fetch a cousin to stay with me as she had to take care of my grandmother at home. No one else was around. About half an hour passed, and finally, the healer arrived. When we arrived, the truth was, my head was a mess and I hadn't paid attention, but seeing her, she was incredibly beautiful. I don't know if it was me or what, but her skin seemed to glow. It was very pale, although that didn't take away from her beauty. In her hands, she didn't bring any bottle, ingredients, or remedy, which seemed strange to me. When she got beside me, she said she needed to light some candles and close the windows and door to start her work. She needed to concentrate. There was only the dim light of the candles, and visibility was very poor, besides me feeling very dizzy. The healer was with her back turned, doing who knows what. Then she turned around. That beautiful face was now completely deformed. Her skin turned so dark it looked burnt, almost charred, with rashes that left me completely stunned. Suddenly, she had no teeth, and only her disgusting tongue could be seen. I got up as quickly as I could, but she reached me with impressive speed and grabbed my chest to throw me to the floor. Her strength was so immense that when I hit the floor and hurt my back, I was on the verge of fainting. However, on the ground, I could no longer see her silhouette in the dark, but then I felt hands around my neck that I couldn't see, and those hands began to choke me without giving me any chance to defend myself. I felt the air stop entering my lungs, feeling totally desperate. I even squeezed my own neck, trying to free myself because I couldn't touch the skin that was strangling me. Even though I resigned myself, thinking I was about to die, I kept struggling while something choked me. I fought with all my strength. Then footsteps were heard running, and seconds later my cousin entered the hut, seeing me on the floor fighting against something neither he nor I could see. As soon as he touched me, those hands around my neck released, and I started gasping for air desperately. It took me about 5 minutes to say a word, and the healer was nowhere to be found. I later confirmed that my cousin couldn't see her, but I told him what happened anyway. When we left that hut, the real healer was coming out of her home with the remedy in her hands, and there I realized that the person who entered was not who she said she was. The healer entered the hut and saw many things scattered on the floor, asking us what had happened and why I had scratches on my neck. That's when I told her everything. She thought for a moment with a serious expression and told me I was very fortunate that my cousin arrived on time, because that thing that appeared and attacked me was not human. There were many rumors that in that forest lived very dark entities that pretended to be human to take the souls of people who were unwary near the forest. Decades ago, witches performed many rituals with human sacrifices to summon demons from the depths of that forest where the light never pierces the treetops. I never approached that forest full of dark energies again. Even so, thanks to that experience, I was able to quit alcohol, and I am now improving my life. But what I experienced, I will never forget, and I hope the people in my town never approach the forest, especially at night. Greetings, community.